be, thank you for starting the recording. Okay, so let's officially get underway. Again, thank you again, and welcome to today's HSP-O FHIR Group meeting. So what you have seen on the screen here is the draft meeting agenda. As the first order of business, I would like to ask anyone who have a chance to review the meeting agenda. Are we happy with the meeting agenda? Do we have items that we need to change or new items that we need to add? Or anyone has time pressure that wants to have the meeting agenda reordered, so therefore you can participate in discussing those agenda items before we kind of approve the meeting agenda. Danielle, you have your hand up?
I did. I wanted to say, and I appreciate that it's gone on the agenda, that item 5, AFMM1. So one of my current, I guess, jobs that I'm doing across some of the specs is going through and like doing all the QA checking and make sure we're all good to go. And so what we realized is we didn't have AFMM1 for some of the new AU Base artifacts, which is why item 5 is there. That's 2 code systems. But another thing I have noticed is there's also a value set. So there's a value set that is the value set off the digital health source system code system that we should also consider for AFMM1. And I think that should be the last of the things that we need to confirm whether or not we're satisfied to move forward to, I guess, the minimum publication.
So do you need the agenda number 5 to be amended in any way that would reflect what you want to discuss, or are you okay with the agenda item, but we would note the requirement that you've just mentioned and we'll discuss as we come to that item?
Yeah, as long as there's no like concerns about that, I'm happy for the agenda item to sit as it is, and I'll just make sure that when we go through, we look at all 3 of the outstanding decisions.
Okay, awesome. All right, Ruben, you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I need to leave in about 20 minutes, so if it's possible to look at items 3 and 5, sorry, 3 and 6 as soon as we can, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. Okay. As I think the approval of the meeting minutes and also the updates shouldn't take too long. So
Sure.
very quickly after that, we'll do 3 and we'll do 6, and then we'll move to the others. Would that work for you?
It would.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. All right. Okay. So with that in mind, then I assume that the draft agenda is approved with those minor modifications in terms of ordering and noting item number 5 with what Daniel wants to discuss. All right, now the second thing is approving the meeting minutes of the previous meeting. So we have 2 meeting minutes here for approval, and then I have put one of them in chat, and then this is the second one that we will also be approving. So the first one, which is which is sort of like the immediately before this meeting, which was the December the 3rd meeting. I saw an email came out from Brett a while ago, about a day or 2 ago, sort of broadcasting the meeting minutes. So we'll go through the first one, and then we'll go through the second one. And let's sort of, unless there are any objections, let's, in the interest of time, approve them, both of them together. So a slow scroll sort of through the meeting minutes, so which is from here, where you have the recording at the top, and then the item being discussed sort of through the lengthy documentations, and I think thank you. I can't remember who's taking the notes. I think that's in my memory. That's Lucy who took the notes, and I thank her for taking the comprehensive notes. So that's that one. And then the one before that, which is the November the 19th, and you have the link in the chat that you can scroll through in a bit more leisure according to your own preferred speed. But the the meeting notes are included here as well. So by way of order of business, does anyone who have any concerns about the notes and about any changes that didn't, in your opinion, didn't accurately reflect the meeting discussions that you want to raise for discussions and changes? Okay, not hearing any. May I ask for a motion to approve the two meeting minutes together?
I will move that, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you, Brett.
Okay.
Brett moved to approve the two meeting minutes on the November the 19th and also December the 3rd. Can I have a seconder, please?
I'll second Michael Osborne.
Thank you, Michael Osborne. So we have a motion on the table. We have second, Brett. Can you launch the e-vote, please? Or the online vote? Okay, we have the vote on your screen now. Can you please vote affirmative, negative, or abstain? All right, I can't vote, so I don't count. Okay, I count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, we can now end the poll. All right, do we have the results, please?
Yep, so with my +1, I've got 4 affirmative, 0 negative, and 6 abstentions.
Okay, so that meeting still the motion still carries. So thank you for those of you who have voted. Now it's here. Okay, all right, all good. And then let's quickly move, in the interest of time, move to agenda number 2, a quick update from Brett on the HL7 International and AU ballot reminder, and also the Connectathon report back.
Oh, cool. Yep. So notably, we do have the FHIR R6 ballot going on now. I think it's opened, and running through the holiday period. So if there's any specific issues on FHIR R6 that people want to read, have voted on by affiliate voters, we can definitely take issues that are logged and vote on them. So Ruben and I, thanks Ruben. Ruben and I are the HL7 Australia, a couple of the HL7 Australia affiliate voters, so we can vote on the international ballots. So yeah, if you do have a particular problem, please do have a review. There's some interesting stuff in dosage that is interesting to look at. But yeah, it really is a good idea to have a look and see if there's any concerns there that would affect future work for us. The other thing to note is we do have our local ballot. The sign-ups are actually open. I'll get the link for that in the chat. But we've extended the sign-up period for the February-March Australian ballot period. So we're running it. It's opened yesterday. So we are also going to run that through until Feb 13th. And yeah, so if you do want to participate, please sign up. We have the AU patient summary R1 working standard ballot going on, and we have the 6.1.0 AU base ballot too, which we've discussed in previous meetings going on. And that is it for that ballot period. That's probably enough on that.
A
Thank you, Brett.
question. There's an AU Base .1 thing that's going to come out a little later. Do we have any sort of ideas on timings for that?
That is what is in ballot in February, March.
Oh, it's the .1 that's in ballot. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that will have just the content that we agree to go in for that ballot. So we do need to get cracking on that content to have it ready for publishing in Feb.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? If not, then let's move on to the Melbourne Connectathon quick update.
Best demand ever. There's not much. I mean, there's not much FHIR Work Group news really, other than we did run our 4 tracks. That was good, and there was successful connections, and I think there's some more reporting that will come out of that event. That's probably about all I want to say. I don't know if you want to say anything, Andy.
No, I don't think so. It was good to see everyone going across the various tracks and doing some work. We will, I think, need to think about some consequences of expanding tracks next time and what that means for coverage, and obviously bringing in potentially the agency's PD work next time. So we'll be looking at that early next year to understand the consequences of it.
Thank you, Andy. Danielle, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to provide, I guess, some of the overall kind of experiences that we had from some of the Spark-related tracks, in which I think one of the things that I noted, and a number of other people did as well, is that we had a lot of new participants this time, which was fantastic. So there was overall, I think, maybe less connecting and more people coming along and going, what is this FHIR business in Australia, and kind of really getting started. So that's one of the observations. The other one is that, again, I think the breakouts were really good, really well attended, and I got good feedback from people coming up to me and talking to me about all the breakouts, including the just about all of them, actually. So I think that continues to emphasize that the breakouts have had a lot of good value, especially I think for new people. And we had a lot of people who aren't necessarily technical. And so I think they were able to feel included and have some conversations through that breakout experience.
Thank you. Any other follow-up comments or feedback on the Melbourne Connectathon?
No, just in response to Danielle, that obviously the next one will have a whole separate day associated with non-technical kind of outcomes. So we will have a better opportunity to, I think, work with those who and give kind of more value to those who don't necessarily want to be doing the connecting, but do want to be there to have the learning and discussion.
Thank you. Sounds wonderful. So are they kind of a separate day as to sort of close to the technical one, or are they separate as to quite separate from in terms of scheduling from the technical one?
Yeah, physically co-located, so it'll be a 2+1 deal, I
Okay,
think is the idea.
right. That sounds wonderful. All right, thank you. If there is no further comments or inputs for that update, then let's, in the interest of time and acknowledging that Ruben has to leave quickly, so let's move into item number 3. Brett, can you start with that one, and then we can then
Yep.
move to Ruben for his thoughts.
Yep. So Ruben may weigh on this in a minute, but since co-chairs, there are 3 co-chairs terms ending at the end of the year, and we haven't yet had arrangements from HL7 Australia to run elections for filling those positions. So just in terms of this working group, there was we wanted to make sure we had some continuity until arrangements are formally announced. So starting 1st of Jan 2026, the idea was that we would essentially appoint our outgoing co-chairs as interim co-chairs until things are finalised. That this may be redundant, but it's just as a formalisation in the last meeting of the year. We wanted to just confirm that with the work group so that we had a sufficient number of co-chairs starting for the first meeting next year until things are organised and announced properly from HL7 Australia.
So any indication as to when that HL7 AU arrangement would be due or available?
I think that is a board matter, and I'll throw it to Ruben.
Okay.
Thank you,
There is a
Brett.
plan. There is a plan.
Yeah.
There is a plan.
Yeah.
But it's not formal
I
yet.
can assure you
Yeah.
there's a plan. It's just awaiting board sign off at this point. I'm expecting information to be shared before the end of the year. I realize that's very imminent, but it's just waiting for board sign off, Stephen.
Okay. The end of the year is just less than 2 weeks away, so we'll wait in earnest for that to appear.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay.
Look, I think, sorry, the one thing I would just add there, what's tied up in all of this, of course, is the implementation of the HL7 Australia Governance and Operations Manual. We're trying to pull all of these things together for the first quarter of 2026, and that's why it's taken a little bit of time. But we will hear something before the end of the year.
All right. Thank you. Daniel, your hand is up.
I did, because from a process perspective, I think the continuing interim arrangements or otherwise is always expected to go through the relevant work group. And so I think we need to either call for objections or have a vote to make sure that the work group is actually okay with that kind of continued arrangement of the outgoing co-chairs continuing until we have that changed kind of process, elections otherwise.
Yeah, thank you. That's the point that I'm going to make sort of in the order of business, because based on international conventions, work groups do have to vote to put in place the interim co-chairs. But we'll get to that sort of before we run to the next progress to the next bullet points of the agenda item. Ruben, any other things that you want to add to that?
Nope, that's it. Thanks, Stephen.
All right. Okay. Cool. Thank you. All right. In my experience, in following international conventions, the work groups do vote for the peoples to be in the position of interim co-chairs, awaiting official finalization through the HL7 board process and also the balloting or voting processes. So in the interest of that, Daniel, you are prepared to put forward a motion to vote for those people on the list as interim co-chairs.
I'm happy to motion that we allow the interim arrangements of the outgoing co-chairs, which we've got on the page. That's me, that's Brett, that's Stephen, to continue co-chair duties in interim until we have the. How do we want to word this for the minutes? Who is taking the minutes, by the way?
Brett is taking the minute.
Okay. Until we have the
HL7 board official process finalized.
yes, until we have
Yep.
the HL7AU board official process for the new co-chair arrangements.
Okay, for the new co-chair re-election, if that's the precision that you want, Daniel.
It kind of was what I wanted, but I also don't want to preclude what HL7AU might do, which is kind of
Okay.
why I left it vague.
All right, sounds good. All right, anyone who want to second that motion?
I'll second, Stephen.
Thank you, Jane. All right, so before we go into the official voting, there's another order of business. Any one of those listed as outgoing co-chairs who are under this motion for voting to become interim co-chairs happy to or not happy to continue to stand and want to step aside?
Didn't know that was an option, Stephen.
Well, there is an option. There is always an option.
There's always an option. No,
Yeah.
I'll continue. That's good.
Yeah. All right. I haven't heard anyone who wants to step aside, so therefore we assume that, or we confirm that all three outgoing co-chairs are happy to stand in as interim co-chairs. So okay, so we have a motion, we have a second. Are there any further questions and discussions?
Yeah, I'd like to. Okay, this is not nitpicking, but I think it's quite relevant. I've got a friendly amendment to suggest. Rather than referring to said parties as interim co-chairs, can the motion be to extend the terms of the three co-chairs?
From a procedural perspective, is this what you are suggesting, Ruben, an HL7 board position?
Well, that is how it would like. That's how the board would probably like to consider this, given that we aren't bringing any new people in. We are simply requesting that the co-chairs whose terms are ending on the 31st of December be extended to the 31st of March.
They're not yet interim co-chairs. They won't become interim co-chairs until after their term as real co-chairs expires.
So back to you, Daniel. Are you happy for the friendly amendment, or you think that you still want the original motion?
Yeah, I'm okay with the amendment to say that the co-chair term we're voting extends to the 31st of March, noting that seems like a really tight time frame.
That's my view
And I
as
think
well.
it's safer to just say interim until there is the election from HL7AU, which means we wouldn't
Yep.
have to re-vote if we
That's fine.
miss the
Happy
31st
with
of
that.
March.
Happy with that.
All right, a friendly amendment on the friendly amendment that all those three outgoing co-chairs the terms to be extended until HL7 AU co-chair re-election process is in place. Is that okay?
Sounds good to me.
All right, okay. Then we have a motion that has been agreed upon. Any other questions? All right, in the absence of any further questions raised and discussions to happen, then Brett, can you please launch the e-vote? All right. Can you please vote for this motion or vote on this motion? Okay, let's do a countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, we can end the poll and let's see the results.
All right. We have 11 affirmative, 0 negative, 0 abstentions.
Okay, cool. Unanimously approved. Thank you very much. Okay, that takes care of item number 3. So item number 4 is missing. Number 6, placeholder for HSP-O and HAE discussions. Ruben, you want to discuss this next?
Yeah, it's not my topic, but I am an interested party.
All right, then go ahead. You can. Do you want to lead the discussion, or do
No, I
you
think this
so
want
one's
I
Brett.
I think
Oh,
it's
that's
Brett.
Brett. Okay,
Yeah.
right, Brett.
Well, it's only me indirectly because a ticket was raised on the AFCP project, the Healthcare Connect Australia Provider Directory about
Hang on. Sorry. Aren't we talking about item 5?
Well, that's
No,
item
6.
6.
6.
Yeah, not
Oh,
item
was it
5.
6 that you wanted, Ruben? Sorry, I thought
Yes,
you
it
said
was 6.
5.
No,
Yes,
no,
No,
That's
yeah,
yeah.
there's a 4 missing.
ignore me.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, it was raised against the AFCP project, and suggested that data type profiles for these 2 new national identifier types would be good to bring to AU Base. That was confirmed as a good idea, and I was hoping the agency would go ahead and do that. That's my extent of involvement.
no, we will, as in put together a tracker item for this enhancement. I think all we need to understand, Brett, is the timeframes by which that needs to be in for the next release of AU Base.
Oh, that's easy.
So
We've got 2 more meetings. 2 meetings in Jan,
yeah.
and then that's it. It's content closure at that point.
So when is
Sorry,
the content freeze, Danielle?
Beginning of Feb. Let's
Feb.
have a look at that. Because we've got to get it in, and then we have to do FMM1, right?
Right.
So we've got 2 meetings
Okay.
in January,
Um,
which are the 14th and the 28th. I know I'm not sharing my screen. They're in the HL7AU calendar. And then there's one more meeting just before we possibly, I'll just double check that, before we have to have published the ballot
yeah.
publication. Oh yeah, one more meeting just before we have to publish the ballot publication. So it's quite squishy.
So you want to
Oh,
share the calendar, Danielle, to
Sure.
give
I mean, you
people?
could also click on it on the top left, but if you stop sharing, I can share my
Okay,
screens.
I
Either
will
way.
stop sharing. Yep. All right,
All
you
right,
go
I'll
ahead.
share my screen. So in terms of what we've got, and I'm trying to make that bigger. So that's publication of the final, like this is what's going to ballot is on the 16th. Working backwards, there are a max of 3 meetings. Well, I guess we could call an extra one. There's 11th of Feb, and then we've got 28th of Jan, 14th of Jan.
Jan.
There'll be some of that time for those meetings will need to be spent on the admin things to like get across the line for some of the other specs that are going to go publish as well. But I mean, a good chunk of the meeting should be available to go through new content.
all right. Put us down to have that ticket ready for discussion and vote on the 14th of January.
Okay, bearing in mind that a lot of people might be away on sort of those first 3 weeks of January, but I think if we are confident that we can get everything ready for discussions, then that will be
I think
fine.
so.
Yeah.
I
All
think
right.
so.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right, I'll
Yep.
stop sharing.
Yep. On those, the profiles will look very similar to other identifier profiles. They are very
Yep.
similar. It's quite straightforward to have the profiles available by then, there is a possible hold up on reserve values for examples, and they have to come from from Services Australia. But if we haven't got them by that date, we may well have them in time to slip them in a little later in the process in
A
examples.
ballot, you can deal with that as a ballot comment, I'm sure.
Yep. So, but other than that, yeah, they're going to be very similar to the other similar identifier profiles.
All right.
Oh,
Sounds good
actually,
to
sorry,
me.
a thing that's just occurred to me is that the identifier profiles, as they are at the moment, have various constraints on them. Like they have to start with these digits and they have to have a LUN check and things like this. There are internal parts of those identifier strings that can be more locked down, and it would be possible to simply add extra constraints to the identifier profiles to further lock down them to make them closer to what the formal description of the identifiers is. Are people interested in that? Should I whip up?
They will be, for
Okay,
sure.
right,
Yeah.
good. I
can,
only
we
recently
can.
discovered that. If there's some appetite for that, then I'll start the process of getting some requests for those changes and start doing proposed changes for those.
So
Okay.
in terms of facilitating this, and coming into that work group meeting, if there could be a design or a branch, like I think taking off my FHIR Work Group co-chair hat and being more of the publication facilitator kind of business, we could make available a branch that you guys could um merge into that would have it available, and that could even be posted on Zulip prior to this call so that people would be able to have a look at it. Um, and that could give us, I think, a more productive conversation.
Right. Okay. So we could do the work on the profile, then have that moved across to the AU base, the AU base profile. Okay. Yep. Fine. I'll talk to you about it later. Okay.
Yep, sounds good.
Sounds
All
good.
right.
Thank you.
That sounds good. Heath, you have your hand up.
What about an out of session review just to help facilitate things through?
You by out of session, you mean between the January the 14th and January the 28th?
Or earlier, I mean, I think some of the mechanisms we've seen from e-requesting, from core, from patient summary of having a build branch available that people can see and just posting on Zulip or whatever and saying, here's a Confluence page where you can provide some comments or questions could be useful.
Yeah, I'm in support of having the content earlier, but I'm just mindful about an out of session meeting before the 14th of January because I don't think that a lot of people would necessarily be back for the discussion.
Or but it's optional. So it's if they're available and they've interested, like again, we had a small working group around things like the medical record number 1, which I think was useful to sort of get that worked up.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying and agree with you, Heath. How about we put this out of session meeting in reserve and we decide on the meeting during the meeting of the 14th of January. Are you okay with that?
Yeah,
Or did you
absolutely.
want?
And I mean, as Danielle said, like if it's all prepped, there's a wiki page, all those sorts of things. Maybe it's not necessary, but it's just an extra kind of quick walkthrough that potentially might help tease out some of the issues and get them sorted out before it comes to this
Yep. Sounds good. And
forum.
and if the content is made available online and then notified to the stakeholders through Zulip and also through email, I think that will work. Okay, I think that gets agenda number 6 settled. Any further comments, questions, discussions before we move to the next agenda item? All right, hearing none, I've just noticed that number 4 is missing, so we then come back to number 5. So Daniel and Brett, which one of you would like to lead the discussion?
Is there a number 4?
No, number
No,
4 is missing.
that's my
Okay.
that's my numbering. We'll
All
call it a
right.
win. 4 is done.
So in terms of number 5, I'm hoping, Britt, that you'll walk through those and the warnings. And if not, I can have a go.
All right, I will stop sharing, so either you, Brett, or Daniel can drive the screen and the discussion then.
Yeah, do you
Do
need
you
me
want?
to do it, Brett? Or
Oh, yes, please. Thank you.
okie dokie, let me start sharing screen
Yeah.
and then figure out which of my many tabs is the QA for AU Base. Good question. Let's just have a new tab. That's probably going to be faster. Uh, we'll go off the latest AU Base build because we're doing publication stuff. Oh, cool. I got it down to 2 errors. Nice. I'll just make that a little bit bigger for people. I think that's probably big enough for everyone at the moment. Let me know if you need that bigger.
No, that's good enough. Daniel, thank you.
All right, I'll let me just scroll to aha. So off this list we've got the resource status in draft. This is the set of items that haven't hit AFMM 1. One of those we know ethnicity, we've already agreed, won't move off draft 0, so that's out. The other 3 are intentionally part of the AU base R6 scope. Um, of these 3, there's 2 code systems. That's the communication request category. There's a AU digital health source system, which is being introduced through like RSG, recorded sex or gender, and there's a value set matching that. So I think in terms of supporting a downstream spec publication, this one is critical that we work out how to get that to AFMM1, because that will impact the AUB requesting IG. I think these other 2 are important, but I'm not aware of any downstream specification actually requiring this in the current AU base. So if we end up with problems, we could look for a split decision. So I'm just going to go off these now. So reminder, this is the communication request category. And here's the artifact. Here it has the content that has been agreed in our FHIR Work Group, and coming up to, let's just come up to the QA because we need to confirm also warnings, etc. Here we go. So there are no errors. There are 2 warnings and there's 2 information. But for the purposes of AFMM, we don't need to take into consideration the information. So the warnings here are these 2. There's this one, which there is a metadot profile in all the HL7AU published code systems that goes to the NCTS profile. We agreed to put that in. It automatically triggers a warning. This is already accepted by the AU FHIR Work Group. So unless someone wants to raise anything new we need to discuss about this in principle, which would affect all AU HL7AU code systems, I don't think we need to discuss it again. Uh, then there's this one.
Oh, sorry, quick question on that
Yes.
warning. Do we expect that situation to continue, that this is going to be a warning that will persist
Yep.
for the foreseeable future?
We sure do.
Okay, thank you.
And we do for a couple of reasons. I guess maybe we could, depending on how much time we have today, I can talk about that further.
No,
But right
I'm
now,
happy to not talk about it any further.
I think it'll hit us in at least the next release. By that point, there may have been some changes afterwards, but yeah. The other warning is a definition could not be found for the canonical URL. This is the intrinsic value system, or the implicit, apologies, the implicit value system. This is also kind of an in-principle warning to a degree for HL7 AU specifications, whereas part of the definition of the code system, the dot value set, here it is, code system dot value set is filled out with what is the canonical URL for the value set that corresponds to that code system. That resolves dynamically when you're using something like Onto server, but from ID publisher's perspective, it is doing a check to see if there is actually an explicitly defined value set and then throwing a warning where there isn't. So this is known behavior. It applies across a bunch of code systems. It's expected that when we defined this artifact, that's what it would do. So those are the only two warnings. I think they're both accepted at this point by the FHIR Work Group. So we have two questions, I guess, before us in terms of that one is this content sufficient to meet the requirements of AFMM 1 in terms of both acceptance by this group, in terms of its completeness and readiness to go into like testing and start moving on, and also around acceptance of the errors and warnings. Are there any questions or comments people want to make on this content?
I
Could
I
you
would just note that the original code system this one is based on, the communication request reason was in it AFMM 1 previously, and I think we know that they're related, so I think going to FMM 1 makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, there was someone else?
So is it,
was go ahead, Richard.
I was saying, so this code system is in effect a replacement for one that we had previously under a different name. Is that right?
I believe so, but also still in the same release. So it has the previous incarnation wasn't published. The previous incarnation was in development, and that's been revised during the same release.
Thank you.
Andy?
I was just going to ask what version of the publisher you were using when these were created.
The one from like 2 hours ago. So it'll be 0.28. So yeah, I republished this just before the FHIR Work Group to make sure that we had the latest IG publisher available.
All right. So Danielle, progressing forward, is there a motion that you want to make?
I would like to question, do we want to go through these individually? Oops, I was about to go to, do we want to go through each of these items individually or present them as a whole and then vote as a block? I don't mind. It might be faster to do it individually, but
I don't mind either. The question is that are there any complications that might kind of result in a block vote type of thing not feasible?
yeah, there might be. So let's do this one first because I think this
Yeah.
should be the least controversial.
Yep. So let's do it one by one then.
So I'm having a motion that the code system communication request category should be promoted to AFMM level 1.
All right. Anyone who want to second this motion?
Richard.
All right. Thank you, Richard. Are there any further questions, comments, discussions that members want to raise against this motion? All right, hearing none, in the interest of time, let's move to the voting. Brett, thank you. All right, from what I can see, we have 10. I think we have one dropped out. We have 10 still in participation. So please vote on this motion. All right, let's count down to closing. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, we can end the poll and then have the results ready.
Cool. So we have 9 affirmative, 0 negative, 0 abstentions.
Okay.
Yep.
That,
So we've no need for a value set for this code system from what you've said. I guess there's the places that use these codes from this code system use them explicitly rather than wanting a value set.
The value
to
set's
date,
any requesting.
But that's it. Good, thank you.
it's still a relevant question to AU Base. To date, we have not, we have put the definition of the implicit value set in our code systems, but only created a value set in AU Base where it was going to be directly bound in a profile. At this stage, there was no reason to do so in AU Base.
Good. Look, sounds like a nice policy position, and any change would be a policy change on the way to do that. Thank you.
all right. Okay, with that settled, Danielle, move on to the next one, please.
All right, let me get back to that error list. So, here we go. All right, we've dealt with communication request. The next two are about the RSG work that was undertaken by, well, largely by Ruben, who was looking at, actually, I'll just. What's the best way to go to that? Just to show people, because it's not that obvious necessarily. In terms of recorded sex and gender, there are source elements, and you can have a source document or what is really a source system. I'm just trying to see if we've got any real description of it yet. We don't. Oops. But in terms of that extension, and I'll just bop to it. The intention is to allow reference to the source of where you got that recorded sex or gender value. Source document is a document. Source is conceptualized largely as systems. And so the work was undertaken to introduce a set of values that represent I'm going to say likely sources of the recorded sex or gender value in terms of digital health information in Australia. So that has the HI service and APRA, Medicare, and NHSD at the moment. That was the code system that has been developed and agreed through the work group. Are there any questions about this code system before we go look at the warnings and errors?
I guess there's an expectation that this is going to grow appreciably over the next few years. Is
I
that
think
right?
so. I think that was what we discussed when we put this in, that these are the current known sources of that kind of information, and that might change over time, and I guess we'll see some of what comes out of the new national infrastructure.
Okay. Sorry, a quick question. Just reading that first sentence. The AU Digital Health Source System Code System defines concepts that represent digital health sources.
That's right.
I'm just wondering if I get my sex or gender information from an identity document that has nothing to do with health, is this thing involved if I took it off a driver's license, for instance?
No, because that's a document. So there's a
Ah,
separate element, which is source document, which allows you to actually say one of the codes is driver's license. One of them's like
right.
passport and stuff.
Okay, so those things that are bubbling around the back of my head are probably all documents. Thank you.
Yeah,
The
specific record
questions
types. Sorry,
the,
Andy.
the questions obviously what happens when one of these services provide the document, and that's where we kind of end up in this quagmire. And we all had a long and meaningful discussion about it, and then went,
Okay.
it's all too hard.
So we're not going to provide guidance at this level. The guidance on what you do about this quagmire, it will happen, will be given somewhere else after we worked out what guidance to give.
Well, in this release, no. And I guess the question really is, can we put this as an FMM1 code system? Can we publish this in AU Base and then continue to work on it? Yeah. Sorry, Heath?
No, yeah, I've got a slightly different question, so you
Yeah.
do this one through.
So yeah,
So
on
go
this,
through.
I guess the way this is defined, if somebody decided that they wanted to have as a source system something that wasn't actually a health system, then we'd have to make some changes. They'd either have to put in a different code system, could still come through the same pathway, but it wouldn't actually fit with this description of this code system.
Yes, if the system itself didn't contain digital health. So I think it's digital health source system. So the system itself, yeah, it's about whether or not the systems that fall into this for me, I guess at the moment it says represent digital health
Okay,
sources.
right. Okay. So provider directory, which doesn't do any health stuff, is close enough to digital health that it would be the sort of thing that would fit in this. Not that it's a
Yeah,
candidate, but that's digital health is being cast in that sort of way.
I
Thank you.
think it could. It
Yeah.
contains digital health information.
Yeah. But it itself is not a source of such information. Although I guess if you've got it out of the provider directory, and though the provider directory might have got the information from the HI service, okay, thank you.
Yeah, they are secondary sources, Richard. All right, Heath.
Somewhat related now. I'm seeing this as a fairly generic thing. So it's not just about gender
Yes,
here. We're talking about any type of digital health information.
that's right.
Yeah, okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, it just got introduced through the, I guess, localization of that particular RSG extension, but the code system is not restricted to that and can be repurposed for other
Yeah,
information in its source.
that was done intentionally as part of the
Yep,
discussion. Yeah,
cool.
for other, yeah, other purposes.
Yeah,
All right.
I think that expression, digital health sources, yes, is wonderfully vague. And I guess from what Andy said, it's good to keep it that while we figure out what we want it to do.
So we've got
Okay.
the starter set of those values for this, which is the HI service, APRA, Medicare, and HSD. And yeah, I very much expect there to be more. Um, if there are no questions around, I guess, some of the content of it, then we can move into having a look at the warnings. Sorry, no further questions.
All right. Let's move on.
Okay, let's go to what the list of blue. Ugh, let's find that again. There it is. So you will see here we have this warning, which we already walked through for the last one. So that's accepted. That's just in principle, everything will have that. Um, the next one, which was much more interesting, is a definition could not be found. Um, that is
That's
also in
yeah, it's
principle, we
implicit.
accepted that
Yeah,
last time
yeah,
because it is going to this particular canonical URL and trying to resolve it. And when it either doesn't resolve or can't find a FHIR artifact at the end of it it's expecting, it will throw a warning. Because this is in draft, obviously, we have not actually published a redirection of that. So while this is in this particular release, this warning is absolutely going to be present. So both of these are expected warnings. So are there any other questions, or should I make a motion?
Yep, I think it's safe to make a motion. If we have further discussion, we can then call to the discussions after we have a motion and then a second.
Okay, so I'll motion that the AU Digital Health Source System code system is promoted to AFMM 1.
I'll second
All right.
that, Richard.
Thank you, Richard. So we have a motion, we have a seconder. Are there any further questions, discussions, or comments? All right, hearing none. Brett, please launch the voting. Now, noting that poll has dropped, we are now down to 9 participants.
Or 8 voters with you, Stephen.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I'm not voting. So yeah, so we have 9 members, but 9 participants, but 8 voting members. All right. So
I think we're done. I've got all the votes.
All right. Let's count down on the vote. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's look at the final numbers.
Great. So final numbers are 8 affirmative, 0 negative, 0 abstentions.
Okay, motion carried. Thank you. All right. Next one, Danielle.
The next one might take me a bit more time. I've not actually prepared for this. So I didn't prepare for the others, but they're easier because they're code systems. Wow, okay, that's a lot of notification. I'll go the other way.
RSG.
Yeah, I know what it's currently called. I'm just trying to find that. Aha. Okay. Back in the error list, that's this one. That's the value set. So what we've got is and here it is. This code system is referenced in this particular value set. We go over to here. The value set is currently defined as AU recorded sex or gender source. Yeah, it's going to be hard for me to argue for entirely because I'm not that across it, and value sets are harder.
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean that's applied as a constraint on the
Is it? Where?
RSG. Patient.
Let's go have a look at AU patient then.
I believe.
Won't it
So,
be in?
so this is
Maybe not.
the idea is the value set is those entries from the source code system that are relevant to the RSG extension.
I don't know. If we
Is
look
that
at the
the idea?
definition of the value set, this one's harder because I'm not the person who's put this in, so there'll be bits where I don't know necessarily the intention. So if we read it, it says it's the value set for codes that can be used to represent non-document sources. Okay. I guess I'll lodge a query on my behalf as it starts with the word AU. And so if this is for all non-document sources, then what do we include? There's only Australian stuff in there. Though I don't know if there are any actually other values available anyway. but maybe it is only about Australian sources.
Yeah, I think it's bound effectively like an extensible set.
Is it? Again.
Oh, it's not bound. There's an invariant, I believe. So we go down to invariants.
So we're where are we
Yeah,
going? Recorded
Is it,
sex or gender.
yeah,
If I
isn't
go
it's a-
here,
don't we have a profile in AU core?
no,
oh no, not only
not
Is
for
that,
yeah,
this.
not
is
for
that a
this.
different one?
Yeah,
It's,
that's
well, the
for sex
profile
assigned at
itself
birth. Yeah,
targets, yeah,
yeah,
sex assigned at birth and does not deal with this level. So the invariant has
yeah, that's
jurisdiction.
it.
It's got source document type. No, that's document. Then it's here, source.
Yeah, yeah. It was added similarly to the document type um constraint.
So the other value sets are not Australian specific, but this one is Australian specific.
It won't give you a warning effective, like similar to an extensible binding.
Hang on, I'm just going. Okay, no, I think based on what I've seen on the profile, I believe um, that this is actually not meant to be Australian specific non-document sources. It's meant to be a value set of non-document sources, but the only ones that are currently available that are reasonable are the ones that we've come up with. Let's go to the extension just to confirm that. Where's RSG? So what do they have for source? They have nothing. So that makes
Yeah,
sense. That we've got
yeah.
something, and thus that's what we've bound. Okay.
So you'll get a warning if it's not in that value set.
Okay. Interesting. Yep. Okay. So I guess that's the proposal is
Yeah,
that we have identified a number of Australian source systems. We have a value set that at the moment only includes these because these are the only values available and defined for this element, and we have therefore bound this extensively, and guess this is expected to grow, and we'll also incorporate any international concepts that would come in when and if they do, because there are none at the moment. That's my understanding of it.
yeah,
Um, I'm just thinking about the actual expression of that sentence. So you could write a sentence like that as saying, this has got values which an individual resource might use. And then you've got another way of writing it saying, this has got values which are about where you might find things. And I think generally when you read these definitions, they're talking in terms of finding the values from the point of view of the resource that would be using them. And this seems to be turned around the other way of saying, basically, here's some codes for some places that might have sex or gender, rather than saying, here's some codes for the places where I've retrieved sex or gender values. Um,
I
it-
agree with you. I think we'd already tagged that as a fix in some of the editorial language.
okay, right. Yeah.
Because yeah, it doesn't fit the current AU base editorial rules, which would address
Okay,
that
right.
concern.
Yeah, because it's following a different pattern of point of perspective when taking this stuff. Okay.
Mm.
But
Heath?
is that
Oh,
something
sorry.
that stops it going to level one? That or is that probably not?
If we view it as editorial, no. If
Okay.
we view it as substantive and meaningful change, and especially if it changes whether or not we feel that a set of values is sufficient,
Yep.
then yeah, we would say there's more work to be done here before we are satisfied of FMM1.
Right. Yeah. So like I'm happy with the values. I'm just cautious about the description, because the description establishes or attempts to establish the scope of where this will grow to.
Heath, you have your hand up.
So just to better understand how all this fits together, there's no constraints within AU Base around that extension. There's only some narrative around its use.
No, there are constraints. They're represented through invariants.
So we're putting an invariant on the code system.
The invariant. Oh, sorry. No, you go, Andy.
I was going to say it's on a value set, I think.
I think the invariant is on the extension that uses the value. So the resource, the resource that uses the extension says when you use this extension, this part of the extension, the value should come from this value set.
Yeah, it's a very interesting way of doing effectively binding strength. It's like manually doing the binding strength.
That's it. We can use it. Lets you use an unaltered extension. It allows you to constrain an unaltered extension, which does not in itself have that sort of constraint, that binding.
It's like the very standard FHIR approach of have invariant hammer, we'll hit everything with it.
Yep, that's what we did.
Right.
It's quite beautiful.
I'm mindful about time. We have only 20 minutes left, and we have two more items. Actually, three more items. No, two more items to discuss. Are we at a position that we are ready to move ahead with a motion, or do we need to park this one?
Okay, well, I'll just cover off the warnings quickly, and then we'll come back to what I think is the more interesting thing for people on the line is
Okay.
whether or not we think this is complete enough, substantive and complete enough. So in terms of the warnings and errors, no errors. The warning is this one, which again is the same thing around that composed value set. So that's fully expected. There's no issues with the warnings and errors on this one. So it just comes back to us determining whether or not we are satisfied with promoting this to FMM1 and then, going from there.
So the only way to find out is to have a motion, and then we can find it out through the voting or further discussions.
All right. Then I'll motion. I motion that the AU recorded sex or gender source value set is promoted to AFMM1.
I'm having
Okay.
second.
Sorry, Andy, did you second that?
I did.
Okay, cool. So we have a motion on the table. We have a second. All right, let's open up for further questions, discussions, and comments. Richard, do you still have concern about the text that you want some changes?
I have concerns about the text, but one, I can't figure what to do to improve them. I think needed to be a bit more clarity around what's there. And on the other hand, I think that those concerns are things that can probably be solved while this is at FMM1 through people bringing up comments or through the ballot process. So given that, I'm happy for it to go to 1 because I don't think it will, making it 1 won't block its improvement and will make it easier for a wider group of people to see it and then work on its improvement. So I'm happy for it to go to 1.
Sounds like a plan. All right. So with that note, Brad, can you please launch the vote? All right. Can you please vote on this motion, please? All right. In the interest of time, I need to count down on the vote. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's end the vote.
Cool. So the result is 8 affirmative, 0 negative, 0 abstentions.
All right. In that case, then motion carried. All right. Thank you, Danielle. Any other things that you want to discuss before we move on to agenda item number 7?
No, I'm good.
All right, cool. All right, AUPS, there is a GR ticket. Who would want to discuss that? And are you happy to share the screen to lead the discussion?
I'm
All
happy
right,
to
cool.
discuss
Thank
it.
you. Yep, I go for it, Heath.
Okay, so as a result of a AUPS ballot response around the use of no known medications for in a patient summary entry, we had agreed on a resolution that required us to recommend a new value set. Now, I can go into the details of that, but I have had the opportunity to talk about this a couple of times in the last 2 meetings. So unless people need to get the context, I think let's just move on to basically what the ticket is that is reflective of AU Base, unless there are questions which I can address. But basically, this ticket, I am asking for a new value set to be created in NCTS and have that value set in basically include the existing values from the Australian medication value set, plus one additional code from SNOMED AU called No Known Current Medicines. So it is an AU only code, and then that value set to actually be a preferred binding in AU Base MedicationStatement medication element to replace the existing binding at the international level, which is just SNOMED CT medication codes as an example. So that is basically what ticket is requesting. And as I said, I'm happy to go into more context if required, but that's the proposal to this group.
All right. Thank you, Heath. Okay, Daniel, you have your hand up.
I do. I know there's been a wider conversation kind of happening around in the pharmacy group internationally. Do we have a position on that yet from them?
Yes, we do. I am at the moment drafting some recommendations on the pharmacy meeting, and I will be able to share later on once that is being done.
So in general, there has been some additional content, and so again, Stephen will probably know some more details on that. But what I understand at the moment is that they have changed the definition of this slightly, so that a code can be used. So where is it? Medication. What am I doing? Yeah, that's the right place. Why is this not right? So the medication that is or was taken or not taken is basically the change that has been made to support this scenario. There is it explicitly supports representing statements such as no medications are known or taken, and there is some statement that suggests that it is perhaps not recommended, but that is probably the more contentious part of the current changes to the content. So there's some stuff here that's talking about why there are no medications and conveys no known medications. Be aware that may appear in these resources. So there's somewhere here where it says it's not recommended, but
yeah, I can't remember where, but there was a statement that sort of I say that it is not a recommended approach.
Well, just above that
there.
tick.
In general,
Yeah.
this is not a recommended approach.
Sorry, Richard.
I was just pointing out that thing that that was just found.
Okay, Andy.
This is maybe a naive question, but with medications, with this approach, would this same method be used then for no known problems, no known conditions, no known, so they're all going to have unique codes for those kind of no known?
Some of
Yeah,
them will,
that's
yeah.
We already
yeah,
have.
yeah.
So no
For
known allergies, no known problems is an
yeah,
existing pattern,
mhm.
but not the areas that are not currently supported are no known immunizations and no known procedures.
And
Yeah.
meds.
So, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and meds. Yeah, we don't have support across AU Base Core or any other AU spec for the no known meds either.
Yeah. So a couple of things that I want to add to the discussion. Number one is that ballot sort of contents are to be applied to R6, but I also flagged a number of problems with regarding to R4 medication statements where the values, the status itself is defined differently from the R6 medication statement, and the value set is a lot broader. And so therefore it becomes problematic in its use. So I am in the process of recommending some changes that might be applicable to both R6 and also R4 in particular. But that recommendation will be discussed in the subsequent pharmacy conference call, and I will keep you guys posted. There is actually another options that pharmacy is in consideration with IHE, but I won't preempt that option until it has got some legs to stand on. And if that option sort of happens, then we'll probably sort of have a generic pattern approach without having a proliferation of use case specific code sets or code items. But anyway, so that's what is currently we are at in terms of pharmacy international discussions, and I'm proposing some changes which I'm currently writing, and then will be discussed in the upcoming HL7 International Pharmacy course. Richard.
A couple of questions. One a general thing. If the dust is settling on this, we don't want to wind up doing something unusual that will be fiddly for people working from overseas. But I think we all know that. The other one is, what's a sensible value of medication statement status when you use this value?
Well, in R4, we are recommending the sort of a reduction of the value sets to active, enter in error, and unknown, where the definitions of active is being redefined to indicating that the medication statement record is active.
Okay, so active is saying this medication statement is active, not
yeah,
the use of this medication is active.
right.
Okay, right. That makes sense. Okay. But then that doesn't work with completed. This medication statement is completed. Seems to be a different.
Well, in the context of no known medication, the value set is reduced to 3, and I will not recommend the use of the others in R4.
Okay, right.
I share similar concerns. I think that we should really only be putting stuff in a value set where we can provide implementation guidance.
Yeah, the implementation guidance, I have also raised the issue about how do the implementation guidance are being provided, and HL7 International Pharmacy is currently in discussions about how those recommendations should be sort of provided through which avenue.
So AUPS has provided this guidance.
Right.
As you can see on the screen, this is actually what has been approved at AUPS level. Now, I mean, this can be propagated up to AU base if we have this concern that we can't have a value set without the guidance. but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, obviously there's process. So
Yeah.
we're in a kind of an iterative loop here
Yeah.
to some extent.
So yeah.
We need the
So
value
this
set,
is
but we need the guidance,
yeah.
but we need to provide the guidance. We need the value set.
Yeah. The
Well, no,
conversation is still
we can
continuing.
consider both, and we often do. We can go, we want to add this code, and we would at the same time add the value set content. We do that relatively frequently where
Yeah,
we
and
where
there's
we put them
this.
both together.
Yeah, at the international level, there's discussion of not limited just to one active, but because there is a use case for enter in error and there's use case for unknown. But anyway, those discussions are still happening, and I'll bring the outcome to this group and also to the AUPS discussions when those discussions have been settled. Notwithstanding the international discussions, Heath, do you have a motion or is this just FYI only?
Well, I was hoping to get progress on this. I have spoken about it 3 times for information, or 2 times previously for information. So,
So we have 5 minutes left. Are you ready, or are we ready to sort of move on to a motion?
well, I'm happy to motion
All
that
right.
we do as what is suggested up above. But I'm open to any friendly amendments if we want to improve the current proposal.
So the motion is to accept by the proposal as sort of stated in this JIRA ticket FHIR 53469. Is that correct?
Yes, to basically to create a new value set that includes the existing value set of Australian medication plus no known current medicines, which is an existing AU SNOMED CT code, and replace and apply a binding to the medication element in the AU Base Medication Statement.
With the binding string being example.
Preferred.
No, it's preferred.
Prefer, okay.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So on that code, that no known current medicines code is currently published and in use and is an Australian code, if I understand right. And from what Stephen said is the international medications people are looking at a code with the same meaning in the international version of SNOMED or something similar. Is that right? So here we are. We're adopting a code that we're extending the use of a code that's currently in use, but that code may soon get a better representation of the same concept. Is that about right?
I believe that we have actually asked for this code, this Australian code, to be promoted to international. That is my understanding, and I don't know if Danielle can confirm that that has been done, but
Michael Osborne, has that happened?
I'll have to take that one on notice. I'm not sure.
but that was the plan. I thought it was Matt Cordell that might have been trying to do that.
Okay, so if that's a pathway forward and it's a plausible pathway forward, then there's an acceptable chance, or there's a reasonable chance that this, in fact, code for this concept may continue to be the international code for this concept. And so we're not, in a sense, increasing our use of a code with a limited lifespan.
Well, there's the existing code that they are using in IPS is no known medications. The code that we've planning to use is no known current medications. So it makes it explicit that it's about current medication.
Are they meant to, so they are meant to be different concepts, though, aren't they?
The problem is the existing code is screwed up definitionally.
And by the existing, it's the international one that has a troublesome SNOMED definition.
It's
Right.
it's an unknownness rather than a knownness.
Okay. It's a poorly defined concept. We've got a nice, clear international code for a poorly defined concept, and we've now got a nice Australian we've got a better described concept here, which we'd like other people to, if not use, they'll use something. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, that code for no known medications and a couple of the others came out of the work that we were doing around lifting. Uh, when we were using open air and going into our exclusion statements, um, and taking all of that work into FHIR code systems, we did that work around these codes and adding them to SNOMED CTAU. Gosh, it might be 5 years ago now that we examined the existing codes, and the advice from the terminologists was that to use, because it was, the explicit assertion of a known knownness, to define an appropriate set of codes for that. So we've had in SNOMED CTAU a few of these codes that are meant to represent that map onto what we were doing with shared health summary at the time, and I think still are, and then map into patient summary as well, because it's basically the same thing. And so it's one of the things we've ended up flagging with IPS about their concept usage that I think is being worked through slowly in IPS. They've recognized and kind of agreed, yes, the code is the way it's defined is a concern. So there's some background work that is going to be undertaken to look at that.
Okay, so we are at time. Are we ready to move on to the voting? I think if I make the motion, was it Richard or Michael Osborne second that?
I don't think I did.
Oh, you didn't. Okay, then who was the seconder?
I don't think there was a request for a second.
Oh, I haven't made the request, so I was sidetracked by sidetrack discussion. My apology. All right, so we have a motion on the table. Would anyone want to second that motion? All right, we can't go home if there is no seconder.
Is it too late to add a friendly amendment?
No, not too late. All right, but we probably would want. Okay, I think we can add a friendly amendment before we call for a second. Let's go for it.
A friendly amendment to add the implementation guidance on how the no known current medications would be used. That's my hesitation here, is that I think we shouldn't be adding a concept in AU Base without any guidance on how to actually use it.
So something like this.
Yeah, I know we haven't particularly agreed on it yet, and so maybe we actually need to postpone that to agree on what the guidance is, but that's my hesitation, is that the introduction of the concept needs to come with sufficient support to actually use it. It wasn't an issue with no known allergies because the FHIR standard itself says how you use it. But in this case, we don't yet actually have that in R4, so we'd need to do that heavy lifting directly in base.
If we added this additional support, additional guidance, is that into the motion? Does that soothe your concerns?
What is what I think so?
I think
Yes.
it's the right sort of thing. From one of Stephen's comments, I wonder whether populate status is active is too restrictive, so that the status, because Stephen was talking about status having a set of 3 possible values instead of 1 value. But I think this is the sort of thing that we should include with it.
So what would be the friendly amended motion be like?
So
Okay.
basically this with the additional guidance to populate effective date time with the date and time of this statement, and a status of active when that code is used.
Daniel, does that meet your friendly amendment requirement?
It does.
All right. So in that case, with that friendly amendment in place, anyone who would want to second the motion?
So I mean, I'm happy to second in
All
that
right.
case.
Okay, so we have a motion made by Heath. We have a friendly amendment by Daniel, and then Daniel second this friendly amended motion. All right, Brett, please.
Can I just ask, before the voting goes up, because we've dropped participant numbers, CSIRO now
Yep.
goes to the predominance of influence. So we
Right.
need to go, I'll vote, and who else wants to vote on this one out of the CSIRO folks? We'll just have two.
think leave Michael Osborne for this one.
All right,
He's
Michael
still here.
Osborne and I will be the two CSIRO voters.
Okay.
Okay.
And Richard, are you still here? Yeah, Richard is still here. All right, we have an agency voting member, but all the others have dropped. So, okay, let's sort of see how the vote pans out. All right, the vote is on your screen. Please vote on this motion. All right, countdown, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's look at the outcome.
Okay, we've got 5 affirmative, 0 negative, 0 abstentions.
All right, motion carried. All right. Okay, we are practically running out. We have practically run out of time. The last item about HCA-PD, do we need to discuss it right now, or can that be deferred until the first meeting in the new year?
I think we'll have to defer.
All right. Okay. With that, we will defer that item for next year. Are there any outstanding action item that we need to report on?
Only have happy holidays.
All right. So, in that case, then we can adjourn the meeting. 6 minutes, sort of post the meeting time. And thank you everyone for your participation. Our next meeting is on 14th of January. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for your strong support and contribution throughout the year. So a very Merry Christmas to you, Happy New Year, and look forward to see you all again on the 14th of January. Heath, Brett, we can stop the recording.
Sure can.
Thank you. Happy New Year all.
Thank you. So Heath, sorry, not Heath,